Wednesday, February 15th Performance Committee will now come to order. We are convened as of 2 p.m. I respectfully ask everyone attending the meeting to mute yourself unless you're recognized to speak. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Until further notice, the RTD Board of Directors committee meetings will be held remotely via Zoom and will audio and video recorded. The meeting recordings, along with the unofficial minutes, will be posted as soon as practicable on the board's website. Visit rtd-denver.com to view them, and a live stream of this meeting is also available via RTD's YouTube page. Directors and members of the staff, if for the sake of the record, if you'd like to be acknowledged, I would ask you to please raise your virtual hand and wait for me to call you before speaking. Directors and staff participating by phone can also raise their virtual hands to indicate that they would like to speak by pressing *9. To toggle your mute setting on the phone, press *6. I'd like to call the roll now. Vince Busick.
Here.
Director Catlin. She'll be here soon. Director Davidson.
Here.
Director Deschel.
Here.
Director Guzman.
Here.
Mr. Sloan.
Here.
And I am here. So for the record, we have 6 directors, the members of the committee present. And I know that Director Catlin was planning to join us soon. I don't see any others besides the committee members present. I see Deborah Johnson and several other staff members. The first item on our agenda today is the selection of the committee chair and vice chair. I'll facilitate the election, and once both seats are filled, I'll turn the meeting over to the new committee chair. Unlike the executive committee process, which uses secret ballots for the election of board officers, for committee leadership appointments, we proceed with open nominations, discussion, and vote by the full committee. We'll begin with the selection of the chair and then the vice chair. We'll allow up to 3 minutes for those board members who nominate a candidate, those seconding, if any, and any other members who wish to speak regarding the candidates to speak. I'll then call for a vote, and the candidate with the most votes will be appointed. If only one director is nominated, the committee may proceed by acclamation, and that director will be appointed. I will start by asking for nominations for committee chair.
Madam Chair.
Director Busick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would nominate second Vice Chair Eric Davidson to chair the Performance Committee. Second Vice Chair Davidson chaired our Finance and Planning Committee last year, did a great job, was involved in the Audit Committee, did a great job there as well. I think he'd do a fine job as the chair of the Performance Committee. So hence the nomination of second Vice Chair Eric Davidson.
Thank you, Director Busick. Is there a second? Or anyone else who would like to comment?
I'll second.
Yeah.
Pleasure working with Director Davidson on various committees last year, and the last 2 years actually, and I think he brings a great approach to evaluating hard challenges. And I know we noted a few things we wanted to change about performance at the end of last year and the way in which that evaluation is done. The ways in which we can make it better. And I think Director Davidson, second Vice Chair Davidson, provides a great leadership for that.
Great. We have a nomination and a second. Are there any other nominations for chair? All right. Are there any no votes for this position? Great. We have a new chair. Director Davidson, I'll finish the elections and then we'll switch it over to you. I see First Vice Chair Catlin has joined us. Hi there. We just elected Director Davidson, or Second Vice Chair Davidson, to chair the committee. And now we're going to take nominations for Vice Chair. Are there nominations for Vice Chair? Director Deschel.
Thanks. I'd like to nominate Director Sloan. Director Sloan has served, I believe, on the Performance Committee in the past with us as well, and has been a member of the Executive Committee. Director Sloan also has a background as a mayor, sort of in that public elected leadership role, and as a result has sort of seen a lot of what it means to do that management. I think we're a great vice chair for Director Davidson.
Great. Pardon me, I'm sending the rest of the script document to our new chair here. Director Busick.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I would second the nomination of Marjorie Sloan for vice chair of this committee. I know she and I have had a lot of discussions about the performance committee, about the performance evaluation process, and I share a lot of her thoughts and direction on this. So I think she'd be a great second or a vice chair for this committee, and has my second.
Great, thank you. We have a nomination and a second for Director Sloan for vice chair of this committee. Any other comments? Okay, any other nominations? All right, are there any no votes for Director Sloan as vice chair? All right, we have a new chair and vice chair. Thank you both for doing that. Let's see, I just sent you the rest of the script there. Did you get that, Chair Davidson?
I have not seen it yet, but I think we're pretty straightforward, so I can go ahead and pick things up, and when that comes in, I'll open it up.
Okay, the only piece that we still have to go through is the public.
Yep.
So, great. It's all yours.
All right. Thank you, Chair. And I did just receive that. So thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate the trust doing this. We got our work cut out for us this year, and congratulations, Committee Vice Chair Sloan. I look forward to working with you and the rest of the committee on our work ahead this year. All right, we're going to go ahead and move into our public comment section. As always, we'll open this up to anyone who would like to address the committee regarding any topic listed in the published meeting agenda for the current and immediately preceding month. If you wish to speak and have not done so, please raise your virtual hand or press *9 on your phone. Staff will unmute you when it's your turn to speak, and if you're dialed in, you can use *6 to toggle your mute settings. Please bear in mind that any comment will be recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded, then your comments will need to be submitted in writing. Any speaker that has documentation or reference materials for the committee can submit those materials to the board office at rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com. During public comment, the committee will not offer any comments or responses. Directors or staff may follow up with speakers following their comments if the matters lend themselves to follow up. Speakers should begin their remarks by stating their names, and each speaker will have 3 minutes to speak. We'll go ahead and ask our staff here. I'm not seeing anyone in the queue, but is there anyone in the queue wishing to speak that our board staff can see?
We do not have any in the queue at this time, and we did not receive any
Great.
emails either.
Okay. Thank you, Jillian. Appreciate it. Given that, we will go ahead and close out the public comment period. We have 2 discussion items today. That will be the bulk of the agenda. So we're going to go ahead and get started on those. The first agenda item is the committee priorities and the path forward. So at the end of last year, there were comments made by a few directors indicating that the committee should reevaluate its priorities. So the open question here for the team is, what should the committee prioritize and plan for moving forward? Certainly, I have some thoughts around this. I think this is an important thing for us to discuss here. But before I lend my thoughts to the matter, given that I am chairing this, I'd like to open the floor to my fellow directors, particularly those who served on this committee last year, to maybe comment on what worked, what didn't work, and let's have a general discussion about what we want this committee to be, and I'll go ahead and hold my comments for a little bit here. So let's open the floor. Director Deschel, please.
Thank you. I think, as far as priorities, I think it's, from my perspective, it's sort of managing towards our strategic plan, right? So we undertook a strategic plan, and the plan only works if you work the plan. And I think Ms. Johnson does a great job of that. But continuing to stay dialed on that, I think is important. Last year, as vice chair, I definitely got a lot of feedback from folks around timing of when we give feedback, how that process is done, noting that a portion of that is contractual, and around flexibility. So there were directors who, memory serves me, didn't feel as though the evaluation tool survey that we used sort of gave them the ability to really provide more subjective and flexible feedback. And I know there were as well some comments on the ability to adjust comp up, one-time bonus compensation, because it is very formulaic right now. But sort of the ability to looking at how to adjust that, I think it would also be great to hear from Ms. Johnson, whether it's before or after, in the middle of the rest of us, to hear from her perspective. We've now done this 1.5 times, really only once. And from her perspective, how did it go and what changes would be helpful for her and, leading her day-to-day with the agency and the managerial side.
Great. Thank you, Director Deschel. I appreciate that. Let's go ahead and collect everybody's feedback and thoughts here. I'll take some notes and we could distill this. And at a future meeting, just for everyone's benefit, what I'd like to see us do is take today's comments, look for the intersection of them. I'm happy to help lead that process, and then we can get back together and formulate our path forward. So with that, Chair Geisinger, please.
Great, thanks. I agree with what Director Deschel said in terms of, triggering this off of the strategic plan and in terms of looking for more flexibility than what was there. And to me, I think that, and Ms. Johnson can speak for herself, but we've had this discussion at some point in the past, and is, setting up a system where I feel like we're able to give really more meaningful feedback, because I didn't feel like our system last time, really gave us a good understanding of what she's focused on and working on, and gave her a good understanding of our feedback. So that would be my top priority.
Great. Thank you, Chair Geisinger. Director Busick, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I agree with a number of the comments that have been made already. One of the biggest disappointments for me was this community value survey process and the impact that it may have had on our GM CEO's evaluation. It's a risky thing to do, to incorporate community feedback in an evaluation of a GM CEO where the community generally really doesn't have the facts about what's going on in the agency and internally. And, Ms. Johnson has made tremendous strides in this agency, moving it forward in positive ways. And sometimes that just doesn't show on the outside. So I think we need to take a look at what worked and what didn't work, obviously, for last year, and gather our thoughts on that, decide what we want to keep, what we want to discard, or what we want to change. I also noted it seemed to me as if we had no meeting cadence at all in the beginning of the year, and then it was a rush to have a meeting every week for the last couple months. And I think we should, if we're going to take a hard dive into the evaluation process, start meeting a little more regularly early on. That's all I have right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Busick. I said I would hold my comments, so I don't mean to be overly enthusiastic nodding, but I think we're on the same page. And I think almost reversing the trend, early planning, and then reducing frequency later makes sense. So thank you. Committee Vice Chair Sloan, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've been putting my hand up and down. I do agree with all the comments so far. But I would like to point out that this should be a very important committee, in terms of the success of RTD as a whole. And I didn't feel like the last year's committee had much of a meaningful role in determining the evaluation. And, by, the course of our procedure, therefore the board didn't really have a meaningful role. I think we need to work on the effectiveness of this committee and recognize that it is important to the success of RTD. And of course, by extension, Deborah, our terrific CEO GM. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Sloan. Much appreciated. And Board First Vice Chair Catlin, please.
Thank you, Chair. There's not much I could add. I completely agree with Director Deschel about really anchoring this to the strategic plan. And I very much agree with Director Busick in terms of how we go about structuring this process. And to Director Sloan's comment, it's really important for the agency as a whole. It's not just a committee that is charged with evaluating our GM CEO Johnson. It's really looking holistically at our organization and looking internally at the board as well. So to the extent that we can maybe look inward and figure out some self-evaluation tools, I think that that would be helpful for this committee as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Catlin. Very helpful. Let me see. I've got feedback here. All right, great. Well, thank you. Appreciate the comments. So, Director Catlin, I will echo. This is a great transition to some of the comments that I had. To me, this committee is really about two things. And the first and foremost is evaluating the performance of the agency. And so thank you for making those comments, Director Catlin. I think, measuring how the agency is doing against its plan is fundamental to what this team needs to do. By extension, then, because of our delegation of authority, we delegate a great deal of the authority of this agency to our general manager and CEO, Deborah Johnson. So the evaluation of her performance, as well as, and specifically against her contract and her agreement with the agency is paramount. So I think those two pieces, and being really clear on how we evaluate the agency performance and how we evaluate our CEO are critical. Agree with it. Many of the comments here that we have a great strategic plan as a starting point. I would remind everybody that in here, not only do we have the Net Promoter Score success outcomes that we had highlighted in our 4 strategic areas, but we also have a great deal of KPIs that are mixed into the various scorecards for different functional groups, be it finance, administrative, et cetera. And when we first laid out this strategic plan, the discussion we had was that we would really bubble up everything to the board to a few success outcomes that we could really measure, and we would measure both the CEO and the agency performance on those. I think what I've heard is that maybe some of those success outcomes have not, there's a belief that it maybe hasn't served us particularly well at being able to evaluate perhaps both. And that it may be that there are some other KPIs that we can actually go to look into, but the fundamental problem we're trying to solve is evaluating agency performance and evaluating CEO performance. And those may be the exact same. They may also not be. There may be some slight differences. I think they'll be more similar than different, given that we delegate a great deal of the authority to the general manager. I would like to see us have a very be grounded in the problem we're trying to solve, and then have a discussion about the specifics of what types of factual performance indicators we could anchor to for agency and for CEO performance. So with that being said, and I think there's some intersection of that with many of these comments, I'd like to actually open the floor. And Ms. Johnson, I hope not to put you on the spot here. I know we haven't had a chance to submit questions or discuss ahead of time. But we've heard from directors about what worked, what didn't work last year regarding your performance and regarding the performance of the agency. I'm sure you have thoughts on the matter. I'd love to open the floor if there's anything you would like to share about lessons learned, what worked, what didn't work, then we can gather those intersections with you as well. So is there any comments you'd like to make, Ms. Johnson?
Yes, so thank you, Mr. Chair. First and foremost, congratulations, Chair Davidson, and congratulations to Vice Chair Sloan. I look forward to working collaboratively with you all, as well as the entire committee, as we have done previously. I would share that there is an opportunity, and hearing the comments, and I've had the opportunity to speak with everyone who spoke independently, so there is alignment. And I recognize that we have opportunities before us. Recognizing that we have a strategic plan, as all of you know, we need to create baselines as we go forward. We're at a point now where we're actually collecting information, so we can garner where we are and what might we do to improve, and then honing in on the various tactics that will enable us to realize the vision, to be the trusted leader, mobility with the community and the customers that we serve. So recognizing where we are, with hindsight being 2020, I support more regular meeting cadence. Secondly, I welcome the opportunity to get feedback. There are several members of my team that are on this call right now, and I basically meet with them and have one-on-ones, on a recurring basis. So when it is time for evaluation, there are no surprises, because by working in partnership, there's an understanding where we are aligned, where there might be opportunity, and where I can lend in and give a helping hand. On the flip side of that, I also ask my team what it is that I can do to be more supportive of them. And if there's feedback they want to provide me, if there's something that I did that basically didn't enable them to be their optimal selves, I'd like to hear that as well. So that's something that would be beneficial to me, because I pride myself on being an evergreen learner, and I want to continue my growth as relates to what it is that we can do to better this agency and realize the intent of the General Assembly when they created this organization back in August of 1969. So those are my key thoughts as we go forward. We can have conversations relative to what key performance indicators we may look at, recognizing that we are within the various divisions and departments of the organization tweaking some things. Case in point, with Charlene Pilecki being here as the Chief People Officer, as we look at the full life cycle for an employee, there's a myriad of things that we should be focused on as we look to sustain our people power, right? And so some of those elements weren't memorialized when we first did this, because we didn't know where we were, as we were all learning what some of the pain points were. And a lot of that information has been informed by us being engaged with the most valuable assets we have in the organization, being the people, the employees that make up RTD. I would say another area that we should have a discussion on, and it's not, and I don't manage by personalities, it's the position. So even if there's somebody else sitting in this chair as the general manager and CEO, something that's come up is that there's not a pay structure. There was a presentation that was presented by the consultant Gallagher, but nothing was ever identified by this committee in reference to adopting that. So as we go forward and we look at compensation and structure, there's nothing in place right now aside from having a report that was provided to Gallagher. And I think that is imperative for you all to have in place from a best practice with human resource management. And so I welcome the opportunity. I like the comments that were provided. I recognize that, this board is comprised of 15 unique individuals, but collectively there's one board. And so what would be beneficial to me as well is understanding the direction collectively as a body. So I can ensure that I'm meeting the expectations of you as the policymakers, but also as the entity that manages my performance. So that's what I would impart at this juncture, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to provide those comments to you. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ms. Johnson. Much appreciated. So I think, we're starting to talk a little bit about our second discussion item as well in the midst of this, which is our meeting cadence. I do have some thoughts around that. I think I'm hearing that there's actually some common themes. So just starting from the simple, Ms. Johnson, you expressed something some other board members have, that, we were limited in the beginning of the year and then rushing at the end. I think we can flip that on its head. And thank you for your comments about some of those other items. I took a few notes here, and I have some actionable proposals of what we might do at the next meeting. But before going into those, based on what I've heard here, let me just open the floor again for further comments. And Director Guzman, I see that your hand is up, so please go ahead and take the floor.
Okay, sorry, making sure I'm unmuted. I'm new here. Hi. I want to know how often we are meeting. How often is information given back to the CEO from this committee and taken to the board? I come from an industry where we have ongoing communication about this on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly basis. And twice a year, we have the serious sit-down conversation about where we're checking in. And so I don't understand, I guess I don't understand what's going on with the meeting cadence and what's going on with not having a proper conversation ongoing, as well as specific timely check-ins to reach benchmarks throughout the year with the CEO or on the agency. So if anybody would be able to explain to me what's going on with that timing, I would really appreciate it, because I probably have a couple more questions regarding the timing and the meeting cadences. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Director Guzman. Much appreciated. Good question. Certainly something that we experienced last year was that the committee cadence was not as easily set and was not as frequent, almost treated more like some of the ad hoc committees, sort of on an as needed basis. I think there's an opportunity, to your point, to create a cadence that's a lot more regular, a lot more predictable, and also affords the opportunity to provide more direct and more frequent feedback to our CEO and general manager, who then can in turn express that to the team. And I actually would love to see us align with General Manager Johnson, how you manage your team, so we can kind of create a cadence between us where our feedback can, be clearly conveyed to you, and then, you're able to manage your team, in accordance with your schedule as well. So I think there's some ways we can potentially align that. So Director Guzman, long-winded way of saying last year, we really weren't as regular as I think we could be. Not necessarily that we have to have immense frequency, but we just didn't even really establish this. And I think we have an opportunity to establish here. So the next discussion item is actually with regards to our cadence. I have a proposal on that. I'm sure many people do. I want to put a pin in that for the moment, so we can tackle that with the discussion item to come. But Dr. Guzman, any further thoughts or comments based on just that initial feedback and answer?
Sorry. Yes, I do. I think everybody here has a responsibility on this board to consider how we treat other humans. If we put somebody in a position, we have a contract with them, and we are expecting work from them, a work product of any type, that we own the responsibility of having that continuing conversation with them directly, honestly, and getting feedback from them about what's working and not working from our end, so that we can advance policy and make changes in a timely manner to support that work. And so I just want to be very clear. One of the reasons I asked to be on this committee is because I think it's really important that we have a look from the ground up, and a look from the aerial, and a look from within. And I really do believe in the 360 view. And I don't know where everybody else's backgrounds lie with doing this type of work. I'm sure you've all had experience doing it. Maybe you haven't, but this is part and parcel of what I do every day. And so I think it's really important that the engagement piece of this we take really seriously, because it falls on us, right? We're the ones that make the decision about what happens with this agency, who leads it, and we are the ultimate person to be responsible for what is working and what is not working. And if we're not in full support of who we have put in charge, then we're failing as the leaders as well. It's not just one person, so there's no finger pointing. We have to own the responsibility we've been given and we've taken as.
Very well said, Director Guzman. I completely agree. We have to have one voice, a clear evaluation process. And I think we owe that to our general manager so that she can in turn convey the measurement of performance to the remainder of her team. So very well said. Couldn't agree more. Further discussion on priorities. All right, here's my proposal. I think we need to get back together. I would like to propose that we do that in April after we have had the our retreat, after we've had a couple meetings under our belts, and most importantly, after we all have a chance to do the following. I think it would be very important for everybody on this committee to review the strategic plan, not just the high level of what we have in our success outcomes and the strategic priorities. So the strategic priorities being community value, customer excellence, employee ownership, and financial success. And then the outcomes being the high level net promoter score, as well as we have our finance and how we balance budget. I'd love to see everybody go through and actually read through some of the tactics, some of the key performance indicators that are in here, get familiar with it. There actually is a quarterly performance scorecard. I think it's a great starting point, actually, where we could establish a quarterly cadence. Again, not to jump ahead to the second topic here, but I think everybody should go through and really look at that and think about what KPIs and what success outcomes could truly measure and clearly articulate and communicate how we're doing against the strategic plan. So I think I'd like everybody to do a little bit of homework, and I'd love to put on the agenda one discussion item for that meeting would be a KPI discussion, an open discussion where General Manager Johnson, perhaps even members of your team, as well as members of this committee, could have discussions and somewhat brainstorm. Not that I think we're going to do any kind of huge changes, drastic changes, but I think given everything I've heard with the uncertainty, it would benefit us to have an open discussion about how we truly can measure our progress against those plans. And General Manager Johnson, I see that your hand is up, so please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to speak. So recognizing your request to the committee in regards to reviewing the plan, recognizing there is a disclaimer saying that we would modify tactics. And as I indicated in my previous comments, with having Stuart Summers here, as well as Charlene Pileggi being members of the leadership team, and looking at key performance indicators relative to really engaging for community value and employee ownership, some of those have been modified. We actually just had a session amongst the leadership team on Monday where we collectively talked about areas. For instance, Mr. McLeod, I've heard you guys loudly and clearly. Of course, we have to have a balanced budget. So we've had conversations around that. So I just wanted to ensure that I'm being very transparent when you're talking about reviewing some of those tactics. We have made modifications because we have used that as the baseline relative to evaluating employees' performance. And there have been modifications because we have been using that document as intended. And so I just wanted to ensure that you all had that level of understanding that with division departments and things, that there have been some modifications made to really encapsulate different elements of the tactics that could yield a better return on our investment. And we use the survey results to indicate that when we looked at the net promoter score. So if we need to focus on some aspect of cleanliness of vehicles, are we doing that in a different manner? Are we power washing the vehicle, 3 times a week versus, once every other week? So I just want to be clear, what you're reviewing is not the current document. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Johnson. I appreciate that. I think one thing that's powerful about our strategic plan, like other strategic plans, is that it creates a framework that the further down, the more tactical it gets, the more likely it is to change. The further up it goes to strategic priorities, the more anchored we are to that. I think where I have struggled a little bit, particularly as it relates to performance evaluation of both agency and general manager, is that some things, so net promoter score, for example, and community value, to Director Busick's point, feel very, there's a good measurement there. It's a good way to anchor to, are we making progress? Are we getting this net promoter score view of the agency? But it's also very long. And that's a very, very long process. It takes a lot to develop. I know we're making great progress. And the great thing about those surveys and why I think we should keep those surveys is exactly what you just mentioned, Ms. Johnson, which is that we can actually respond to them and create new tactics, new strategies, new priorities at the administrative level and the execution level to actually improve and move towards that. I think when we evaluate your performance, Ms. Johnson, and then the agency's performance, it might help us to have something, some indicators in between that we perhaps set on an annual basis to say, we believe or we hypothesize that we can move the needle on, our net promoter score by focusing on A, B, or C this year. So still anchored to community value, but perhaps there's something we learned from the prior year that we could focus on that may be different each year that is achievable, that's, typical SMART goal, right? We can actually measure this and it's achievable and realistic. I think that is what I'd love to have a brainstorm about. And thank you for the reminder that I don't think we should go all the way down to, adjusting what folks are doing or even measuring those KPIs. And I don't want to put homework on you, Ms. Johnson. I think I want the team very informed here, but my request would be actually to hear your ideas about what could be some of those intermediate KPIs, if you will, that could be on an annual basis. So that's one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is how do we identify that? I know that's really hard, but I think there's probably nothing more important this committee could do than create the framework for discovering that and establishing it. So I've said a lot. I'm going to pause there and see if Ms. Johnson, you have any additional feedback based on that and based on your comments about the tactics, and if anyone on the committee has further feedback on this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I think we're aligned. You understood what I was conveying, and I do think that it's incremental because basically when you're trying to, eat an elephant, it's one bite at a time. And so basically that's what we need to look at as we go forward. And that's what the team and I have been doing, is recognizing that collectively that an individual person's SMART goals being specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound, as you indicated, with performance evaluations for members of RTD outside of the represented employees, individuals have that and it feeds up into what we're doing collectively. So it's no different relative to me where we can identify what that might be on shorter intervals on an annual basis. So I support that. I'm not at a place right now to tell you what that might be, but if given thought collectively as we've had discussion. So I will be in a place to offer up some valuable feedback for our consideration collectively as a committee. Well, you all as the committee, me as your employee.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I'm also not in that place right now. That's why I'm suggesting April. So thank you. Yeah, I think this could make a great discussion topic for us, and it takes some homework on the committee's part, general manager's part, and I'm sure that'll hit other members on the team as well. But unless there's additional changes or adjustments from my fellow committee members, I think what I would ask for board staff here is to make sure that our next agenda will put on that KPI discussion. And I think we can do this in two parts. Number one, I'd love to hear from General Manager Johnson about your thoughts on that after you've had a chance to talk to the team. And then also I'd love to have the floor open for directors as we think about, for example, community value. I think Director Busick, it's the perfect example. There's a little bit of what's the tail, what's the dog, what's the leading indicator, what's high level, what's too low. Let's get into some of that and roll up our sleeves and get specific. The second thing I would love to do is pay structures come up. And Ms. Johnson, thank you for raising that. This has been at the forefront of my mind because as I look at the way we scrambled at the end of last year and also the opportunities we have to improve the structure from a more systemic standpoint, not just for specifically our current general manager, but the long term. I think we got some good information and we didn't necessarily do a lot with it. That's okay because we got that towards the end of last year, but we need to do something with it. So I would love to also add a discussion item to our agenda. I'm going to open the floor to get ideas, perhaps from previous committee members, perhaps Treasurer Deschelle, you have some comments about this, given your role last year. But I'd love to get a briefing of what it is exactly that we learned and what might be actionable from that, and what gaps we have in terms of creating a cohesive pay structure that we can anchor those measurables we just talked about, those KPIs, and how we're going to measure progress to that pay structure. I think we have things we're going to have to improve, look to others in the agency, in people operations and legal to help. We'll probably have to make some changes, but I'd love to just get a brief for this committee so we can level set. Director Guzman is new to the board here and will be playing a pivotal role on this committee. I did not serve on this committee last year. I think many of us were paying attention, but we didn't get full briefs to the board. So, Director Deschel, I might start with you. Sorry for putting you on the spot here, but I'd love to see who might be the right person to deliver that brief to the board and start identifying some action items for that next meeting. Director Deschel, do you have any thoughts on the matter?
Yeah, I think there's sort of a couple different items at play here, right? I think, in addition, not to be the kid who asks for more homework, but we are still all bound, right? While we're measuring performance and monitoring performance, we're still bound by the contract, which has had 4 amendments, and so it would be great to get a fully, we have one full PDF of the contract where it is now. I think it's important that we all understand, what is the contractual framework, and also keep in mind that a contract needs to be signed and agreed to by both parties. And while I think our interests are aligned, that Ms. Johnson still has her rights to say, I don't know that that's the right thing, and not to put words in your mouth at all, but I want to make sure that we all are clear that this is not, unlike some other areas, this is not one where we have, where we can make a unilateral decision. And so I trust and believe and work with Ms. Johnson over the past few years that we will be in lockstep, but I want to make sure that that is sort of top of mind for folks. I think in terms of what pay structure makes sense, getting the Gallagher report distributed to everyone along with the other materials Director Davidson, you had mentioned, would be helpful, just so folks could see what it is and what it isn't. I'm happy to make myself available to folks to talk through that report and what it meant. But I think, from who is best suited to give a talk on pay structure, I think I would, of course, lean on Ms. Johnson for possibly Ms. Pileggi to make sure that we are addressing that in a same or similar manner, or an appropriately similar manner to the way we address all our staff.
Thank you, Director Deschel. Much appreciated. I will call on Ms. Johnson in a moment. I just want to capture above homework, good homework assignments there. I think before we have that discussion item, one thing I heard and a request for our board office would be to send out the Gallagher report and the general manager's contract with all that single PDF that Director Deschel is referring to. If we get that in a single email, it would be awesome to this committee. And then if this committee could please review those in detail prior to our next meeting, that will probably be part of the discussion item that we'll be framing up here. But with that, Ms. Johnson, go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you very much for an opportunity to have another bite at the apple. And I may call on Ms. Pileggi because while I said pay structure, recognizing the position and total rewards is the entire compensation. As you guys go through the Gallagher report, there were some elements of that relative to how I am viewed as an employee in the organization, and the benchmarks that were done with the peer, comparators were done a little differently relative to, PTO and what type of medical benefits and things along those lines. So I just wanted to qualify my statement. And Ms. Pileggi, if you can come off camera and lend any input, I do think she could work in tandem with General Counsel's office. In the interest of full disclosure, as we are talking about the compensation study that was done for non-represented employees, this was just broached, so that's why it's top of mind. So Ms. Pileggi, if you have anything to impart, I welcome your voice at this time.
Yes, thank you. So first off, getting up to speed on all of the information, the Gallagher report and everything, it would be beneficial. What's critical though is to ensure as we've heard, is that we're looking at the total compensation, that we're looking at what is driving, what are the principles and the behavior that we're seeking to drive with that compensation, and consistency with and compliance with respective legislation. So it is I'm pleased to hear the holistic view that that we're talking about here today, and that it's more than just one contributing factor. I'm happy to support however the board and the committee requires that.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pelleggi and Ms. Johnson. Thoughtful remarks, very helpful. I think what I would say is, at the beginning, if we anchor to the problems we're trying to solve, there's agency evaluation, and that I think relates a lot to some of the KPIs and the leading indicators we're talking about. When it comes to CEO evaluation, I think this total compensation package we're talking about needs to be closely aligned with that. And then similarly, Ms. Pelleggi, I would look to you in terms of course, how to best structure this throughout the agency. It's great for things to flow through the agency and for there to be, radical alignment that's deep. So I'd love to partner on this and understand, if there are adjustments. I know we've already made 4 amendments, but, let's see if we can get something, structured that really makes sense, that's anchored to, a thoughtful strategic plan that we have. So thank you for that. I think let's start with the Gallagher review, the Gallagher report review by committee members, the contract review by committee members, and perhaps offline we can do a little bit of thinking. And Ms. Pelleggi and Ms. Johnson, if you have thoughts about things you would like to present or bring forward to the committee, let's do so. For the moment, let's just agendaize a pay structure, total compensation, contract discussion. It may end up being very brief. It may be that we all look at this and we say, you know what, we have quite a bit in place. We're going to learn a little bit more over the months ahead and make some adjustments. But let's at least start with the committee members reviewing, and then I would just open to Ms. Pelleggi and Ms. Johnson if you have additional thoughts that you'd like to make part of that discussion item. Please share them between now and that April meeting. Any of my committee members, I know we've had a discussion here about a potential item for that next meeting in April. Any other thoughts about this? Any adjustments you might make? Any concerns about what we've framed up? Oh, and I'd be remiss not to thank Director Deschel as well for your contributions on that matter. Director Catlin, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not suggesting this for the April meeting, but perhaps down the road. GM CEO Johnson mentioned there have been some changes in the KPIs and the tactics, especially with the changes in the overall organization with Ms. Pelleggi and our new chief of police. And there have been so many changes that I think that later on down the road, this committee needs to take a hard look at the evaluation instrument that we used for evaluating GM CEO Johnson last year, and maybe align them better with some of these changes that have taken place in the organization. That would be my suggestion further on down the road, because I just don't think they were necessarily a meaningful reflection of the performance last year. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Catlin. I've seen a lot of nods. Appreciate that and agreed. I had an item here that I'd love to, and I think maybe not the April meeting, but would love to understand. I know General Manager Johnson, I think you've done a remarkable job aligning the team. We can hear it in numerous meetings, just even in the vocabulary that's used. I think sometimes it's by team members, sometimes it's underappreciated, I think, how difficult that is. I don't mean underappreciated within this agency. I mean in the general sense that alignment is very tough. And I suspect that you have some good processes in place for managing performance, measuring performance, communicating performance. And I think that it would be a great idea as we get clear on what we're going to measure, what problems we're trying to solve. We may be able to do some, borrow some ideas from how you're doing that to make sure that we align those processes. And I think Director Catlin just probably said a little differently. I completely agree. I think there's an opportunity to shift that process, and that may be something we tackle in a meeting after we have our next priorities discussion. Other comments from directors? All right. I think we can have a pretty meaty meeting in April just around, and let's make it meaningful, around KPIs, how we're going to measure this, to discuss this, and coming in with a really grounded understanding of what's in place from a contractual standpoint and what we have in the report. So let's put those two discussion items on. Those may not necessarily be the only items. I would encourage directors on this committee, other directors on the board, since this is really a board function, and other staff members, as you have ideas, as you have thoughts about this, please submit those. And I'll work with the board office as we get closer to that April meeting to finalize an agenda for that meeting. Ms. Johnson, please go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you very much. There's one thing that I did want to call attention to, recognizing the delegation of authority and the discussion relative to scopes of work for undertakings of initiatives that would come closer forward. Considering that we do take the pulse of our communities that we serve, we will be teeing up another round of surveying as we go forward. So that potentially is a agenda item that we would be bringing forward in April. So I just want you to be aware of that, and also recognizing as we talk about scopes of work, this would be a summary in some way of what we'd like to cover, because considering that we try to level the playing field and you do a request for proposal and there's a date in which that's made available, want to have it framed in such a way that somebody's not having an unfair advantage because they tuned into a meeting and listened to various things. So just want to be clear that we're working in partnership, but as we talk about a scope of work, that's just what it is, the scope, and we'll have that going forward relative to different things that may be germane relative to garnering understanding from the community's perspective, and then our customers' perspective, which we feel is important that we do intercepts for people that are actually on the system, because they have an understanding as opposed to other methodologies that could have been utilized. So thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Ms. Johnson. I appreciate that. And I think it's a great point that what we have in flight, let's stay in flight on. And yeah, as we go through with that survey, I think that's great. I've appreciated the reports given, especially by Ms. Riley, on some of the results and some of the progress on that. Let's keep a lot of that in flight. I think it's informing a lot of what we're doing. So if that ends up becoming an agenda item, that's excellent. And it's possible that we can, find the intersection at the time. And probably as we get a little closer, we'll understand how the timing will align. So all that sounds great. I think we're on the same page. Thank you. Okay, if there's no further comments, let's talk about cadence, which has been touched on a couple of times. And I'm going to take a little bit of privilege here as chair and put out an idea and a thought, which I think is at the intersection of a lot of what I heard folks say. So I'll put this out there as a starting point, and would love to open the floor to discussion from anybody who would like to contribute, be it staff or committee members on the matter. I think meeting early to frame up what we're going to be, how we're going to accomplish these goals is really, really important. To me, when I think about evaluation of an agency or an entity, particularly the one that's sizable, it makes sense to do this on a quarterly basis. And again, actually, I think there's good criteria in our strategic plan that we could anchor to quarterly. But before we get to that point, we have to figure out how to get all the processes in place, and we'll have to set what the cadences are. In the long term, I could easily envision a situation where we finish a quarter. So, we finish in March, and then in April, we're looking, in arrears at our prior quarter. I think we're not there yet. I think we have some work to do to frame this up. So I would propose that we meet in April. That's after what's, been a busy start to the year. Some things going on in March, particularly and namely the retreat. We have the discussion items we talked about here. And then I would say we meet in May and in June. So on a monthly basis to round out those, what would be the first 2 quarters of the year. And then I think we can assess what we want the long-term cadence to be. I would envision that being quarterly, perhaps with an additional meeting towards the end of the year, because what we would probably be doing is working on our evaluation criteria for the general manager to round out the year. And then it would be beneficial in January, even as we're onboarding new board members, to have our evaluation of Q4 and the year prior with final data. So that's an example of just, I think, the type of thing we could achieve in the long haul. But I think to get there, we should do an April, we should do a May, we should do a June to frame this up and see if we're ready to go to a quarterly with an annual addition. That's my thought. That's my kind of starting point, but I want to open the floor to what my fellow directors think and also what members of staff may think is useful as well. So please go ahead and raise your virtual hand if you have some thoughts on the matter. Dr. Duchel, quick on the trigger. I love it. Go ahead.
Do what I can. I think that makes sense. I think the initial cadence makes sense. I think I have some logistical concerns on the annual end of year sort of post true up, knowing that our fiscal year, knowing when our fiscal year is and when the general manager needs to get paid out for. There's some logistics issues there, but I think there is a way to do some sort of, I also think it's good to evaluate with complete data. So maybe some sort of true up process or something along those lines, but I think that's sort of a May, June discussion item. But I do want to raise that concern of having a retrospective adjustment to things like CON without running the traps on all those other logistics.
Yeah, thank you, Director Shell. Great point about the fiscal year. I think, and again, this is where we'll have to be clear on our agency performance measurement, how we intersect with board processes and procedures, which involves onboarding in January, how this intersects with the data we've captured. But then the general manager performance, I think, needs to have kind of its own path that we ideally have some good intersection points. So great points. I'll take those notes as some things we need to be considering as we set the cadence. General Manager and CEO Johnson, please.
Yes, thank you so much. And Director Duchel hit on some of the items. I mean, recognizing that here in this organization, we've made great strides, but some of the systems that we have in place aren't optimal. We are operating with some, software that's more or less antiquated. I'll call on Doug McLeod to provide some context, like when we do pull some data while we sit here in closes in December, when we have that information readily available. Mr. McLeod, are you available to opine on that relative to how we pull that data generally?
Yeah, definitely. So our systems our reporting isn't ideal. We have to pull it from several different places. Generally speaking, we're working on upgrading some of our financial information, certainly in some of our systems. We have the ERP, the Oracle system currently that we're working towards upgrading hopefully in the next 18 months. But yeah, generally we have access to the information. It's just not in a readily usable form.
So if you could, Mr. McLeod, so I just wanted to manage the expectation. So December 31st, it's not as if you would have this reporting information 2 or 3 weeks later, which I did have that opportunity at other agencies, but to the point that you raised with our, enterprise resource, system, it's a little,
Yes, it's challenging. As Deborah says, we are data rich and information poor, so we can generally get the data. It takes a little manipulation. Sometimes there's some timing involved. It depends on what we're looking at regarding the availability. So, close out a month end ridership would be an example. It takes us at least half a month to get all that data pulled in from all the vehicles and downloaded. Same with sales and use taxes. Certain data isn't available immediately after the close of a month, but we can generally work around that to a certain extent.
Thank you very much, Mr. McLeod. And Ms. Riley, if you're available as we're collecting information for the others, I wanted to ensure that Ms. McLeod had opportunity, but do you have anything further just so the committee is aware?
Sure, thank you. When we're looking, one of the things that I did want to talk about in terms of reporting on our metrics, we typically need a month past the close of a quarter to get all the data to report on them. So if you're looking at having a meeting in April to get the first quarter data, it's preferable to have it towards the end of the month so we have time to close out on data. And then at the end of the year, the same holds true. Typically have everything within a month, but as what Deborah and Doug were saying, the financial data takes a little bit longer than 13 period close.
Thank you so much, both of you. I just wanted to ensure that we are all aware. So we're making strides to upgrade our systems, but slow and steady wins the race.
Yeah, thank you for commenting on it, Ms. Johnson, Mr. McLeod, Ms. Riley. I wouldn't dare influence my fellow directors' enterprise risk assessment in terms of severity and likelihood, but sounds like a familiar discussion that we've had over on the audit side about our systems. And so anyway, I guess I'll leave that there, but understood on the challenge and well said on the data rich, information poor. So sounds like an opportunity, that as we do improve those systems, this performance committee can adjust its its cadence and the way we measure data in conjunction with maybe also pushing a little bit. There will be kind of, I think, a little back and forth here. So good opportunity as we do pursue those upgrades, particularly on the ERP or Enterprise Resource Planning System within 18 months. Great. I think any other comments, questions, thoughts about cadence and how we approach this? All right. So Director Guzman, you made a good point before about, how did we actually set this, and asked a good question. How did we establish this? And my answer was we were a little ad hoc, which is probably not how this committee should be. But what I'm proposing is a little ad hoc, because what I'm proposing we do here is we go through 3 months and we reevaluate where we are, see the progress we've made in terms of establishing how we're going to measure, what this committee is going to do. So are there any objections to meeting in April, May, and June, and then reevaluating in either May or June what our longstanding cadence will be? As I've learned to say on this board, hearing none, we're gonna proceed with that. So I'll work with the board office. I think it would be useful to get some feedback. I know midday meetings can be tricky for those in careers right now for many of us on the call. So we could probably put some thought around that, maybe collect some feedback, but I'll be happy to work with the board office to reach out to everybody on the committee, and we'll work on scheduling in April and May and June, and also would like to work with General Manager Johnson to ensure what we select and what we move forward with works for the standing meetings and also the schedules of the key members of our staff that need to be there. So we will do that. Moving forward, if I'm not mistaken, that takes us through our agenda of discussion items. Are there any other matters to come before this committee? Director Deschel, please.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for the opportunity. Just very quickly, Director Davidson referenced an enterprise risk assessment. Please, to the extent you have not already done so, first, thank you to those of you who have done it. At least 8 directors have finished out their enterprise risk assessment. It would be great to get to 15. If you haven't done so already, put 20 to 30 minutes on your calendar between now and Friday afternoon to go ahead and get that filled out. I do request updates every day. We'll call you on Friday morning. So please make sure you do that. It's really critical to the audit work, and our ability to advise and guide the agency is only as good as the data we get. So we want to make sure that everyone's listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Deschel. I think we'll always welcome the audit and other matters. So that's great. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Any other matters to come before the committee? All right, so that brings us to announcing our next meeting date, which is to be determined. But I will go ahead, it will be in April. I'll work with board staff. Please look for any communication on scheduling this, and we will meet in April. With that, seeing no other discussion, this meeting will be adjourned as of 3:04 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate the discussion. Appreciate the work. Take care.